Liz Cheney takes Trump derangement syndrome to a new level by blasting the Arizona election audit. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's own aunt disputes AOC's claims about her grandmother. Plus, Fox News' Chris Wallace tries to cover for Joe Biden regarding COVID-19 and China. All that and more. I'm Bobby Eberle. This is a 13-minute news hour.
And God bless the United States of America.
All right, friends, welcome to the show. Happy Monday. I hope you had a great weekend. If you're new to the show, thank you so much for tuning in. We're going to start with Liz Cheney because you have to wonder what is going through her head. Is her Trump derangement syndrome so great that she can't even think straight? Her TDS has already cost her GOP leadership position, and in that case, the GOP leadership gave her every opportunity to succeed and to move on. She voted to impeach former President Trump, and they still supported her. Even when the rank and file wanted her out, the GOP leadership went to bat for her. But her downfall was she could not let go of her Trump derangement syndrome and represent her caucus anymore. Well, guess what? She is back in the news, this time taking an indirect swipe at former President Trump and a direct attack on the Arizona election audit. And here's the story. Representative Liz Cheney slammed an audit of the 2020 election in Maricopa County, Arizona, calling it an effort to subvert democracy. Cheney weighed in on the audit on Friday, blasting it on Twitter. The GOP-controlled Arizona State Senate is overseeing an audit of more than 2.1 million votes cast in the county last year. President Biden won narrowly Arizona over former President Trump by less than 11,000 votes, becoming the first Democrat to carry the state since 1996. Okay, so there were millions of votes cast in Arizona, and the margin of Biden over Trump was less than 11,000 votes. So the question isn't, why would you have an audit? The question is, why wouldn't you? Every state, after a presidential election, or any election for that matter, should have an audit. Every corporation or organization or athlete has a debrief. They have a review after a major event. I used to do it every time after races, even practice events. My daughter and I would sit down after her softball games and have a debrief. Even after my last show, I sent a debrief, a review to Right Side Broadcasting on the things that we can do better. That's how it should be done. But rather than support an audit, Liz Cheney tweeted this: "What is happening in Maricopa County is not an audit. It is an effort to subvert democracy." Wow. This just stuns me, folks, because this is coming from a Republican. And why wouldn't anyone want to have an audit? Why not? Why not review the process and try and make it better? These are our elections. We determine in this constitutional republic who leads us, who represents us, who holds office. We determine that through the ballot. So that has to be secure. We have to make sure that we are doing things right. So to not support an audit, which is a review of the process to make sure every aspect is done correctly, makes no sense. But check this out. Here are comments from Liz Cheney last week speaking to a local Wyoming station.
Inside the party, obviously, we're dealing with a lot of big issues about, the sanctity of our elections, making sure that people know that even if there was fraud, some fraud in last year's election, certainly not anywhere close to enough that it would have changed the result. The election wasn't stolen. And it's really important for us to learn the lessons of 2020 so we can win in 22 and 24.
So we're supposed to learn the results of the 2020 election. We're supposed to learn from those, but we're not having an audit. She won't support an audit, but she wants us to learn lessons from 2020. So what does that even mean? Clearly, she doesn't want us to review the process and see if things went wrong or see if things went right so those can be kept and the others can be discarded, but she wants us to learn lessons. I don't think she's serious about that. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. All right, next let's talk about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. But first, if you're new to the show or haven't subscribed yet, regardless of platform, just search out my name, hit that subscribe button, make sure notifications are turned on. That way you can follow the show and help us grow. Okay, so AOC is still in the news. She's making news, but not in a good way. If you recall, she went on Twitter and she blasted evil former President Trump because her grandmother's home in Puerto Rico was still in disrepair, still in shambles following the hurricane from several years ago. Here's a recap.
Critics are tearing into Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez on Twitter for posting pictures of her grandmother's storm-ravaged home in Puerto Rico instead of helping her. The progressive Democrat tweeting her grandmother recently fell ill and that she visited her for the first time in over a year because of COVID. Ocasio-Cortez then blaming former President Trump for her condition. Okay,
well, here's the deal. AOC's own aunt has come out and disputed the claims that President Trump was to blame for all of this. She says, the aunt says, not so fast. That's not how it went down in Puerto Rico. And here's the story. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's story about her abuela suffering in Puerto Rico due to former President Trump appears to have been shot down by her aunt. The UK Daily Mail visited abuela Clotilda Rivera's home this week and was able to speak with a woman at the residence who claimed to be the New York Democrats' aunt. Assertions that Mr. Trump's administration denied Hurricane Maria relief and is therefore responsible for an unrepaired home were challenged by the Puerto Rican relative. I am her aunt, she told the website while declining to share her full name. We don't speak for the community. It's a problem here in Puerto Rico with the administration and the distribution of help. It is not a problem with Washington. We had the assistance and it didn't get to the people. So, Washington is not to blame, and that is spoken from someone on the ground in Puerto Rico, not someone in Washington, D.C. like AOC. And the fact that that person is AOC's aunt is just priceless. And recall, AOC made this big deal complaining about the conditions of her grandmother's home, and then conservative columnist Matt Walsh, he stepped forward. He helped raise over $100,000 to help her grandmother in these conditions. AOC turned it down. It's pretty fascinating, really. We raised enough to change her grandmother's life. We could have raised enough to lift her whole neighborhood out of poverty. AOC shut it down. She'd rather leave people to suffer than accept help from us. Very revealing episode, Mr. Walsh said in one of several tweets Saturday. So, not a good couple of weeks for AOC. She turns down funds that could be used to help her grandmother, then gets called out by her own aunt. It's just classic. All right, next let's talk about Chris Wallace and the Wuhan lab leak theory, because this theory has been around for over a year. Evidence has been around for over a year, but the Democrats and big tech and the media, like Chris Wallace, tried to suppress it. They actively suppressed the story. You couldn't talk about it, or you were labeled as fringe or dealing in baseless claims. Well, now the media is all over it, and Chris Wallace is actually trying to cover for Joe Biden and blast former President Trump. On Fox News Sunday yesterday, he had on former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, and he was going after Pompeo on why President Trump didn't do enough on the lab leak theory. Here he is talking about Pompeo, who had called out Joe Biden for not pressing China, and Wallace added this.
President Trump and his team, including you, had almost a year after the COVID-19 first came on the scene to really press Beijing on what the origins were, when the evidence was much fresher. Now, there's no question that the president pulled back from the WHO, the World Health Organization, but what did President Trump and his administration, including his Secretary of State, do to press China harder to get the evidence on where the COVID-19 virus came from? Because we still don't know.
We still don't know? Now that the media blockade has been suddenly lifted, we know plenty. We knew it all this time, but the media suppressed the story. They would not let it out. Now we're learning that Dr. Fauci, he knew about the lab leak. He tried to downplay it. Other scientists said, you know what? The evidence really isn't there for this to be natural. It really looks like it was man-made in the lab. They were suppressed. Now we finally get to hear from them. But Chris Wallace, he's carrying the water for Joe Biden, and Pompeo is out there saying, look, Joe Biden is not pressing China on what needs to be discovered on this lab leak.
Chris, the predicate of your question is all wrong. We have a really good idea what happened here. there is an enormous amount of evidence that there was a leak from the Wuhan Institute of Virology. There's a pile of evidence 100 feet high. I have high confidence that that's the case. We pressed the Chinese Communist Party really hard, not just the State Department, but our CDC and others too. We withdrew from the WHO, which become politicized. This administration chose to get back in that. I don't know what tools they think they're going to use.
Pompeo is absolutely right about the World Health Organization. The WHO is just a mouthpiece for the Chinese Communist Party. We all know that. We could see the reports early on in COVID where they were coming out with statements saying China has been so forthcoming, so helpful with what went on with the spread of this virus, how many people were infected, what they think was going on, where they think it originated. That was the WHO. And President Trump was absolutely right to withdraw funds, withdraw U.S. participation from the WHO. So Joe Biden going back sends a strong message to the Chinese Communist Party that the U.S. is not serious, that they are not going to seriously pursue this. Well, Chris Wallace pushed one more time, asking Pompeo if he had any doubts about the lab leak.
So just to button this up, and I want to ask you about one more question. Do you believe that the virus came from a lab leak from the Wuhan Institute?
I do.
So there you go. No doubt in Pompeo's mind, and Chris Wallace is just left staring out into space. All right, next, we're going to take a step back in history to the days of Ronald Reagan, which reminds me of this past administration with former President Trump, who wanted peace, who didn't take us into war, but he showed strength. And through that, the world community knew where we stood. Russia, China, North Korea, they knew where America stood, and we made progress on the world stage. Joe Biden, he's on one of these Barack Obama apology tours, coddling places like China and Russia and North Korea and Iran. It does not send a strong message. Well, you want to think back to a strong American message, a strong American presence? This past weekend on Saturday was the 34th anniversary of Ronald Reagan's speech at the Berlin Wall. Real leadership, superpower against superpower, with America standing up for freedom around the world. Here's Reagan.
Today I say, as long as this gate is closed, as long as this scar of a wall is permitted to stand, it is not the German question alone that remains open, but the question of freedom for all mankind.
Of course, Reagan was right. The wall did not just separate Berlin. It did not just separate Germany. It separated the entire world. The entire world was split along these lines of prospects for freedom versus the oppression of communism. And Ronald Reagan had no problem calling it out.
In the 1950s, Khrushchev predicted, "We will bury you." But in the West today, we see a free world that has achieved a level of prosperity and well-being unprecedented in all human history. In the communist world, we see failure, technological backwardness, declining standards of health.
Now, can you imagine Joe Biden or Barack Obama saying something like that? Speaking out for freedom and blasting communism? Of course not. Now we have Joe Biden coddling China, and we have American companies like the NBA, Nike, and Apple looking the other way while China leads the world in human rights abuses. In the meantime, Ronald Reagan was saying things like this.
General Secretary Gorbachev, if you seek peace, if you seek prosperity for the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, if you seek liberalization, come here to this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, open this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Real leadership, standing up for freedom and not being afraid to call out communism, the evils, the oppressions of communism. That was real leadership. Now we have people turning the other way and letting the radical left take hold. We need leadership. Joe Biden won't speak out, and we see the results. Folks, that's our show for today. I hope you enjoyed it, but don't forget, If you're new to the show or haven't subscribed yet, regardless of platform, just search out my name, hit that subscribe button, make sure notifications are turned on. That way you can follow the show and help us grow. Thank you again for tuning in. Our next show will be Wednesday. Please watch us on Right Side Broadcasting. We'll see you on Wednesday. I'm Bobby Eberle. This is a 13-minute news hour. Okay, friends, thanks so much for watching. And before you go, please hit that subscribe button, hit that bell so you'll be notified. And here's a special video just for you so you can watch even more of the 13-minute news hour. And don't forget to check out GOPUSA.com for the best in conservative news and commentary. We'll see you next time.